Okay, Francis, do you know anything about Lizard Man?
I don't actually. Lizard Man? I've never heard of such a being.
You've never heard this before today, but you know, like back in the 2014, back in 2014, people were really talking about Lizard Man. And like secretly, I believe Lizard Man still exists. You know, Lizard Man is like an alien species, like trying to take over society. You know, the kaiju in Pacific Rim. Yeah, they're the mini kaiju's. They're trying to take over the world. And how are they doing this? They're doing this by dressing themselves up as humans. You know, there's one Lizard Man, the most famous Lizard Man exposed. His name is Mark Zuckerberg. You know,
Interesting.
He's a lizard man. He's actually a monster, a creature from outer space trying to like destroy our civilization. We should kill him.
Wow.
No. Okay. Okay. To all those who like Mark Zuckerberg and does not want him killed, I didn't really mean that. That was pure rumor back from 2014. For some reason everyone believed in.
Okay.
You know, there's some other.
If I might ask, why did they think that Mark Zuckerberg was Lizard Man? That he's here to come in and as like a Trojan horse and take over the world?
Well, you know the nature of conspiracy theorists.
Yes.
The most attracting thing about conspiracy theories is that they are unknown. They're secretive, and humans' nature is curiosity, and that's why we, or let's say any human in the world, are attracted to conspiracy theories because they think that like what the government told them is false.
Yes.
Which is like really is oftentimes the case, but yeah, you get what I'm saying. They think that conspiracy theories are true because they're secretive and they want to join the people who know the truth, or at least the truth.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, so but it sounds like strange, right? You can't imagine why people would believe in such things, right?
I see. So what you're getting to the question is, why do people believe in conspiracy theories? And recently, why are so many conspiracy theories popping up, and those conspiracy theories gaining a lot of traction in, I won't say mainstream media, but underground media, particularly with social media? Everybody has a platform, and they're putting forth.
You're getting something wrong. Okay, conspiracy theories don't just live in underground medias; they also live in mainstream medias. Okay, so
good point. Yeah.
You know, so here I would be honored to introduce the greatest conspiracy theorists of all time. And you know, I'm wearing red today for a reason, because this man hates red and I hate him. His name is McCarthy. You surely know his name. He's an American senator. He is, as I've said, the greatest conspiracy theorist of all time.
View that not exact, Mr. Chairman, but in view of Mr.
His red scare conspiracy theorists change the lives of a generation of Americans.
Indeed.
I would say.
Indeed.
Right. So, Francis, would you?
Well, in addition, it's very funny that when we, as Americans, look back upon the McCarthy period, it's kind of a shameful period in American history. And you're probably wondering, how did his ideas become so popular? How was he such a popular presence? How did his ideas, even though, as you said, that he didn't really have a lot of evidence, there was a lot of this red scare, and he made a lot of accusations without being able to produce any evidence to support those allegations. Why did Americans believe so much of this? Why did we go along with this? And a lot of it has to do, I believe, with the nature of Americans just in general. But you have to consider the political and the political and economic times in which he operated. Yes, he was a bit of a demagogue, but I think, like so many people who peddle in these conspiracy theories, he took advantage of a very particular time in history. So he's not necessarily the one who starts all of these. He is the one who starts, but he understands what's going on in the psyche of people and takes advantage of that. And I think that's probably true of all cult leaders. That's probably true of all conspiracy theorists, that they understand there's a trend moving. People are feeling a little bit economically insecure, or so therefore they have a tendency to believe these things. And he just kind of pushes that message, and people are receptive to that idea.
But wait. So I've learned another conspiracy theorist's time was Japan before like the 1930s, and at that time Japan was poor because of the war effort, the Washington treaties, the earthquakes and such. There are conspiracy theories. I think that like the Senate is corrupt. There was one day when there are teen officers of the Japanese army. They just charged into the house of a Japanese senator and they chop off his head.
Yeah.
But the Japanese were living in poverty. The Americans, well, like after the Second World War, the Americans were living in prosperity. So why did they believe in conspiracy theories?
So that's an excellent point. So I mean, it just goes to show you that conspiracy theories are not necessarily limited to poor people, uneducated people. People of means and education, at least formal education, are also susceptible to those ideas. And I think I'm not a trained psychologist, but I think it's that people believe what they want to believe. So you take the case of Japan. People wanted to believe that the Senate was corrupt. Maybe they were, right? And what the thing about democracy in some cases is that it moves very slowly. And people want things done quickly. And when you take over in a military fashion, you're able to get things accomplished quickly. You don't have to talk to people and negotiate and write laws. You just do these things. And a lot of times, that's what people prefer. They prefer to see a strong, I'll use the word strong, determined and someone who can make decisions rather quickly. So,
right.
And so, I'm sorry, so back to the case of why. I think the case that it happens in Japan, it happened when Japan was in a developing state, was still relatively poor, but rich by Asian standards, I would say. And the United States emerges from the Second World War as the most powerful, wealthiest nation in the world. You can see that humans are humans, right? It doesn't matter necessarily about our material wealth. We still are susceptible. And as you can see this in the United States today, we have so many conspiracy theories floating around. America's still a very wealthy country. It has a lot of material wealth, but people want to believe these.
But material do affect what people want to believe, right? Like if I'm poor, right, I want to believe that a dictator, like let's just say if I am a normal French citizen, a normal French trabajador, during the French Revolution in 1794, when I saw this man's name, he's short, yes, his name is Napoleon Bonaparte, and I wanted to believe, because I'm poor, that he can bring us prosperity, he can bring us glory, he can fight off the foreign invaders that have conquered us and inhabited our lands. So we want to believe in that. But if I am a normal United States citizen, like sipping off almost free beer during the age of golden prosperity after the Second World War, why would I even bother to think about national security?
Right. Okay. And again, it comes back to a lot of what's happening geopolitically. So you have to remember at the time, McCarthy. When does he come to power? When does he become a more vocal voice in American politics? You have to remember what's happened. You have, as you know, the Iron Curtain, the beginning of the Cold War, and I think one of the real great shocks to America was the communist takeover of China. Right.
Yeah.
And so then people start to say communism to the average American is not just an economic threat; it's also a spiritual threat too. And most Americans are what? They believe in Christianity. Communism is a threat to Christianity. It's a threat to people's way of life, economically and spiritually. Therefore, if I see this threat, and of course the United States government, not just McCarthy, but you can think about the Truman administration, the things that the policies that they had executed in order to fight communism, in order to get aid to countries in Western Europe, they had sort of built up this, I'll say, this environment where anti-communist rhetoric was growing very strongly. And McCarthy kind of just piggybacks on that. He just takes it to the next level. And so it's the same thing. It's a threat to people's lives, and that's why people opposed communism. Or at least they thought it was a threat to their lives. In retrospect, we look back, it seems silly to think that there could have been a communist takeover of the United States in 1950.
Yeah, I have to correct you there. Like, communist spies were in the United States.
Oh, I'm sure.
But it's not that like extravagant as described as McCarthy, right?
Correct, yes.
But you see, the Red Scare wasn't wasn't hopped upon by one person only, right? There are other politicians who are trying to utilize the Red Scare to their advantage. They are trying to give analysis. They're trying to tell the Americans with statistics, with anecdotes, with testimony, with evidence to show that they are being invaded by Red spies. So why aren't they as successful as McCarthy? Is this coincidence?
That's an excellent question, and maybe he was the one who just got on the bandwagon first. Why were they not as successful? He was just very extreme about how he did it, right? And other politicians, you're correct. Nixon, for example, uses anti-communism to get himself elected to the Senate. So I don't have a good answer for you on this one, why he was more successful. But you're absolutely right to note that many other politicians use this situation to further their own career, further their own political objectives.
Yes. And you see, when I am doing research on McCarthyism, I gradually found that a characteristic of his speech were lacking evidence, his speech were bold, his speech were rude to some extent, and but the main characteristic of his speech was he was constantly making statements. He's saying, okay, we have XXXXX, that's a number, of spies in the United States. We want to eliminate them. We want to save the United States. He's constantly making statements, or even he's constantly making extreme statements where we want no communism in the United States, right? He's making such extreme statements, but for some reason, nobody pointed out that his statements were extreme.
I guess extreme for the time, if you compare them now, they're probably not considered extreme. And so it takes real political courage to stand up to that, right? If you're going to refute those claims, you have to be sure. And politicians are like people everywhere. They're testing the political winds. He was probably very popular at this time when he's making these statements. In order to push back against that takes a lot of will, right? And you have to put yourself in the firing line. I'm sure some people did, but you don't know who they are. They probably got steamrolled, right? It takes time. It took time for his lies to become more well-known where the public turns against him. And then that's when people start to come forward, right?
Right. Le Bon, like the one who wrote The Crowd, he told us that people believe what they want to believe, and they are can be easily misled by strong emotions or extreme ones.
Yeah.
So you see, extreme statements can lead the crowd further. So let's say you're giving a speech to a crowd. You're saying, okay, I'm giving the example of Hitler. Okay. No offense to any Jewish friends out there. We want to eliminate all Jews. Is this more powerful and mind-bending than we only want to eliminate bad Jews because Jews, there are good Jews?
Right, I see your point. Well, I would say they're all both rather negative statements, but I understand your point. And that's where the strong personality, the strong leader, the authoritarian comes in, and he makes very strong declarative statements. That there's no room for nuance, because nuance is the death knell. Oftentimes, you're kind of on one side we have this, on the other side we have this. People like
a straightforward statement that does not require their brain to process.
A little bit, I would say, and that's. It's not a very flattering remark about human nature, but I do think there's something to that. To your point, Eric. Yes,
right.
Yes.
So, with McCarthyism flowing in the United States, this is a historical podcast, right? So, what happened exactly for the lives of average citizens?
Well, I think, to be perfectly honest, I bet you the average American citizen was not affected at all. And that's probably the case in so many of these conspiracy theories or these political movements. The average person probably does not see or is not impacted a great deal by McCarthyism. However, his statements, his lies impacted the way the United States government operates, and of course it had chilling effect on Hollywood, as we know, and it had a chilling effect, I think, on the creative side. Some people in Broadway, playwrights who might have had left-wing leanings, were purged from their jobs. It's a very, very famous cases. The United States State Department was purged of many of its China experts. These China experts, you might be familiar, the two Zhangs, John Service and John Carter Vincent.
Not heard
So
of them?
John Service, John Carter Vincent were United States Foreign Service officers in China during the Republican period. They had written some rather negative remarks about General Chiang Kai-shek, Jiang Jieshi. And so when China falls, right, McCarthy steps in and says, look, American government is sympathetic to communism. We were not supportive of our nominal ally. Who lost China? Obviously, the State Department lost China, or there was weak people, or there were leftists in the U.S. government that led to the downfall of the Republican China and the rise of Mao Zedong. So these two men were purged from their career in the Service Department, in the U.S. Service Department.
Wait, this is kind of suspicious because, right?
Well, right, because they had written negative reports. I mean, it is their job to give candid remarks about what's going on in a nation. And when we look back, at least when Americans look back on the Kuomintang period in China, particularly with the period after the Second World War to the communist takeover, there's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of corruption.
To be fair, the Kuomintang government did a mess, actually. He did, there was economic inflation, there was a military failure, there was everything negative. It's hard to pick only the good side of things.
Exactly. And so it's their job to write candidly about what's going on. And of course, if you're writing negatively about an American ally, and then as a result of that, there's a communist takeover in China, well, we got to blame somebody. And so during that period of time, there was a lot of, within the United States, there was a lot of hand-wringing. Like, the question is very funny. It's like, who lost China? As if China was the United States to lose. But the implication was, of course, the United States government was not sufficiently anti-communist, did not support our ally, and thus we have a communist takeover in China. And of course, years later, there's a war in Korea. And I believe that a lot of the rationale behind the Truman administration's desire to intervene in Korea stems from the fact that there was a communist takeover in China in 1949. If that doesn't happen, the Korea War doesn't happen.
Yeah, but McCarthy was mostly active during the Eisenhower period, right?
Correct.
But
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but what I'm saying is that he took advantage of that political environment. He understood that, okay, there's a lot of insecurity happening in America right now. People are acting very anti-communist. I can use this message to further my own career.
Right. But really, from what I've read, the influence of McCarthyism is really, really not just limited to the American policies during that time. It's deeply rooted in culture, which is deeply rooted in everyday life. You see, I've heard I don't know whether it's true or not, that a 7-year-old girl in Pennsylvania had to sign some sort of contract that ensures the government that she is not committed to communism.
Yeah.
In the schools, they're not allowed to teach anything about such ideas, or even about Marx or something.
Yes, you're talking about a loyalty oath, right? So I'm loyal to the country. I'm loyal to these ideas, right? And yes, I agree. And to what extent did it boil down into universities and to schools? Oh, probably. Yeah, it probably did. I mean, the United States from that period of time, even after McCarthy had been censured by the Senate, we still were very anti-communist. Anti-communism was at the bedrock of American foreign policy and domestic policy too.
Yes. Yeah. It's only the base color of American policies is always anti-communism.
Yes.
But what McCarthyism stands is not just anti-communism. He stands for a rash and insufficient decision without further evidence.
Yes.
That condemns the rationality of the government and harms the efficiency of policies. as ChatGPT told me.
Yeah. Sorry, please.
So the irrationality that McCarthyism brought, and had to change back to what people think, right? So how did the people think?
Well, anti-communist ideology theory is very popular in America, and it was continued to be popular even after McCarthy. The problem with McCarthy is that he was just accusing everybody of being an anti-communist. And not only, once he picks on the army, and the army is kind of sacred in the United States, right? Other politicians were willing to go along with him, but I think once he starts to attack the army and say there are communists within the army, I think is when the Eisenhower administration, because remember, Eisenhower was, of course, a career military officer, then you're attacking, one of his sacred cows. And I think that's when he begins to say, okay, this guy's no longer useful to me. I'm going to have to let him go. I think there's a lot of that behind the scenes.
Right. So, can you give me a few examples of McCarthy attacking important people in the United States?
Well, let's see. Who is the important people? Depends on how you do it. He attacked General George Marshall, and Marshall, of course, was the hero who had organized pretty much the United States Army throughout World War II, and then he, of course, was Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and McCarthy had accused him of being soft on communism, right?
Why?
Great question. I think again, you're trying to. This is a man, of course, who would later. I'm not sure if it would later go on to institute the Marshall Plan, which of course helped Western Europe rebuild.
I think when he is attacking McCarthy, the Marshall Plan was already.
You're right. Okay. So there's a person who had implemented this plan to help rebuild Western Europe as a bulwark against communism. Why would you attack that? Again, it's probably that he needed to be more bold to continue his attacks on people, to continue to be relevant.
Yeah, so that's the problem with conspiracy theories. The conspiracy theories had to go against something in order to make people interested.
Yes, so conspiracy theories are like a lot of these movements where you need to continue to be more and more extreme to demonstrate your belief in the core system. So what people like to say is that conspiracy theories eat their own. Right. If I could be the original, I believe in this conspiracy theory, and then we just have to keep getting more and more extreme. And eventually I'll say, wait a minute, that's not correct. And then even though I was the founder of this movement, people will turn on me and say, you've given up the movement. You don't believe this. It happens all the time.
You don't believe in lizard people.
Right, exactly. It's like, once you start talking about lizard people, then you start talking about ant people and tiger people. And I'll say, no, there's no such thing as tiger people. And then, you lose the narrative.
Yeah, you have to constantly be leading the theory in order to stay relevant. It's like riding on a tiger.
Yes.
If you stop riding on a tiger,
yes,
it will tear you apart.
Yes.
That's kind of the situation.
Correct. I mean, if you think about a situation in China when the Cultural Revolution was getting more extreme, people had to continue to believe more extreme ideas, right? It's not just we want to reform the government, we want to reform the Communist Party. It's like we have to start purging all these people. It just keeps snowballing.
Right. Speaking of snowballing, let's go back to history, right? So you see, the United States, after winning the Second World War, was literally the strongest nation on the planet.
Yes.
But the thing is, some cracks still remain, right? There are three main things. The first thing is the explosion of the Russian atomic bomb, which is called the Pumpkin.
Yes.
And it was just months after the United States bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, so which really scared the United States government.
Yes, and if I may interject, the question becomes, how did Stalin get the bomb?
Yes, that was literally the core question in Americans' heart.
Yeah.
During that time, before the KGB spies at Cambridge was discovered. So you see, Los Alamos was the highest ranking secret in the United States, but how did information get away in from the New Mexico desert where nothing lived but reptiles?
Yeah,
that's a question. So that was the first catalyst to the Red Scare.
Yeah.
The second catalyst was the fact that the Soviet Russia controlled much of Europe.
Yes.
So you see, back when they were fighting against fascist Germany, the United States didn't realize what the Soviets were trying to do. So let me put an example here. You see, when the Warsaw Revolution,
the Warsaw Pact, you mean, or
no, the Warsaw Uprising. I mean, okay. So the Soviet, they spoke in their broadcasts, in their everything, that they wanted the people of Warsaw to stand up against Germany. But after they actually stood up, the Soviets' armies around that area stopped attacking. So why? There was a lot of analytical essays on that, on this phenomenon. But the most important reason, I think, was that Russia doesn't want the Polonese to greet them into their city as its owner.
Interesting. Yeah.
So you see, the countries around the Baltic Sea, they were later controlled by the Soviet. They were incorporated into the Soviet Russia. They were satellites, orbiting around the Red Sun.
Yes.
So before Americans even knew it, the Russians used multiple methods to control much of East Europe, and the Balkans, and Black Sea, and everywhere.
Yes.
And this sudden overflow of red communism was actually a scare to the United Force in the West, or to the later NATO.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. You're talking about the third reason why Americans were very upset about communism: the bomb, and then the Iron Curtain that descends upon Eastern Europe,
and there was another reason. So, the KGB spies actually got caught in the United States.
Yes.
Right? And they were amazed at their identities. The Cambridge spies were the Cambridge spies were literally around them. Their identities, they're not agents of MI6. They're not police officers. They're not politicians. They're not wealthy people. They are everyday people that you can get in contact every day.
Yeah.
So this sole fact doesn't prove anything, but for those politicians, they can use this fact to prove to everyone that ordinary people around you can be confessed to communism.
Yeah. And I think your point is that the third one, of course, is brings it closer home to the average person. Oh my God, my neighbor might be might be a communist sympathizer, right? I'm not going to tell him anything.
So why divide the Red Scare into three main stages? The first stage is the bomb, which announces to the world that the Red Scare exists for a reason.
Yes.
They announce to the world that the Soviet does infiltrate American government. So the second one is showing you part of the actual outcome of that infiltration. So you see, a bomb is a bomb, right? Although it's a nuclear bomb, it's one of the most incredible weapons in this world. It's still just a bomb. It explodes somewhere in Siberia. It does not affect the United States people. But the people of Nazareth, the people around the Bolshevik Sea, the people in Eastern Europe, these people are real.
Yes.
And they do make a voice. And they do make Americans actually see with their own eyes what the outcome is. The third stage pushes the Red Scare from a national view to a personal view.
Right.
So before you see, the Soviet Union, the people of America thinks that the Soviet Union endangers our survival, our way of living, but what they're scared of is just the Soviet Union itself. It's not anyone in particular. They're scared of this entity as a country.
Yes.
They're not scared of their own neighbors, as you've just said. But the third stage pushes it to a new level, which is the McCarthy level.
Right.
They're now scared of everyone around them, suspicious of being communism. Yeah, that's the three stages of that period, of that time. And what people did was was abnormal to say the least. Yeah, you've ever read the Winter of the World?
Winter of the World? No, I have not.
Like the second book after the Giants Fall.
Okay.
So then in the Winter of the World, there was this couple, which was actually like taken out from reality by the author. It made a few minor changes to their identity because he made the wife actually a spy, but whatever. There was actually a couple called the Lewisburg couple. I think that was the name. Okay.
The Rosenbergs?
The Rosenbergs.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. They were.
Yes, they were executed.
They were electrified.
Yes, they were executed. Yes, for being spies. Yes, and as your point was, they probably were. I mean, later evidence has showed that they actually were spies.
They were spies?
I believe so. Yes.
Wait, I think later evidence has shown that they weren't spies.
I think it showed that they were. Actually, they definitely had sympathies.
They had sympathies, but like I think the niece of his the brother of like Mrs. Rosenberg, he later confessed that he actually sold information to the Soviet, and he mistakenly told on his sister and his sister's husband, which was innocent, that they were spies to evade punishment.
Interesting. I'll have to look this up though, because I thought it was, but I could be wrong. I could definitely.
I think the actual thing was that these two are innocent.
Okay.
But just shows how like conspiracy theories and group psychology works, right? Because the group does not care about logic, does not care about evidence, does not care about any of these things that makes us rational creatures.
Right. That's a good, excellent point. So the group is concerned about security. Mm-hmm. Right. And security, I think, is whether security comes in many different forms, whether it's physical security or economic security or even emotional stability and that type of security. People are willing to take sort of extreme measures in order to preserve their own sense of well-being, however you define your sense of well-being.
Wait, do you have any like examples?
Oh no, I mean you're saying
throughout the United States.
Well, let's just say, take now for example, why are all these conspiracy theories popping up? Right, everything from Jeffrey Epstein to Joe Biden's election in 2020. Why are they popping up now? I think it's because people are feeling really insecure, particularly economically. There's a lot of wealth disparity in the United States, inflation, of course. There was COVID. Good jobs are difficult to find. Mm-hmm. So that's why we're susceptible to these sorts of things. People do not feel secure. Now, do I have a personal anecdote? I could mention my neighbors and that sort of thing, but that's not very illustrative. I have a cousin who voted for Trump because she was concerned about the price of eggs and that sort of thing. Does that count? I mean, that's not really conspiracy theory.
You're right.
Yeah.
So, but that's exactly what makes the Americans during the 1950s special, because the Americans during the 1950s, as I've said before, they had no concerns on living conditions whatsoever. There was prosperity, but they still succumbed to conspiracy theories. So I'm gonna give my own opinion about this.
Okay.
So why did they do this? They're mainly because of two main reasons. Okay. So the first one is because of religious, or it's not that much religious. It's more about ideological reasons. Mm-hmm. So what you've said about Joe Biden. Was Joe Biden and Trump leading two different ideologies clutching against each other? No,
indeed.
Like, they were, but not that much clashing. They still are Americans. They are white people. They believe in the greatness of the United States. They want, in one way or another, to make the United States great, or again.
Yes.
Yeah, but or should I say, Joseph Stalin and Truman had two very, very much different ideologies. Stalin goes, if I can say that, dictatorship, and he wants equal diversion of all resources within the people, but that's impossible with a capitalist like America. Mm-hmm. So you see, the clash the severity of the clash not only is related to the background, but also to the clash itself, which is the nature of the two ideologies. If the two ideologies are naturally very much different, they cannot stand the existence of each other.
Correct.
They had nothing in common. Then, even if the era was a rather peaceful one, conspiracy theories will appear. Mm-hmm. But if the two ideologies were similar with each other, they were okay with the other's existence. Yeah, I can exist, but I can accept you beside me.
Yes.
If it's this scenario, then, well, they can coexist.
Yes.
The conspiracy theories will be less. So you see, America now, we now have phones and other things, but technically, the life was not as good as America during the golden prosperity era, right?
It depends on how do you define that as the question I would ask. I mean,
yeah, depending on the era, right? Like speaking from the perspective of the era. So you see, our life is good. Our life is definitely better now, right, compared to 1950s. But are we better in proportion now compared to the rest of the world? Like, I mean, the people in the United States, than the people in the United States in the 1950s compared to the rest of the world.
No, I understand. So you're comparing, and so the question you're asking is why now, when we have such a high standard of living, with so much technology, why are we so insecure? Is that kind of the...
Yeah, I'm kind of trying to get to the point. So you have to compare the living standards with the era. It's not in general.
Yes, okay, so let me take a stab at this. I would say that Americans after the Second World War still felt very insecure. Yes, our living standards were higher than the rest of the world, but still, a lot of Americans were still very poor at that period of time. So they didn't feel that they were necessarily better off. They probably were a little bit better off, but then you have to remember that the Great Depression was just 10, 15 years earlier, and then we had come through a war. So there's always these sort of cataclysmic events that could drop at any time. Mm-hmm. So I don't think the Americans at that point in time knew that they were in for a period of 20 years of sustained economic growth. They probably did not know that at the time. So there's always a reason to feel a little bit insecure. To your point today, is America the same global juggernaut that it was at the end of the Second World War? No, it is not, right? Obviously, the rise of China and the rise of Eastern Europe and the rise of Japan, Western Europe and the rise of Japan has cut America's share of global GDP significantly. But Americans are still quite wealthy. Most Americans are, but you can see that there is a lot of economic insecurity among working class people and even middle class people for whatever reasons. I think inflation is too high, taxes are too high, China's taking my jobs. So they feel insecure about it, even though looking at it, if Lizard Man came down from space and he was comparing, he would say, why are these people here in the United States complaining, right? On the surface, their lives are quite good, right? Particularly materially, right? But I would say this, it goes back to human psychology, right? We're all feeling, how should I put this?
Insecure.
Yeah, it is a little bit insecure, but it's the notion that we haven't changed that much, right? Technology has changed tremendously from 1950 to 2025. Mm-hmm. But human beings at the heart of it, we're still the same, right? We haven't really evolved that much. We still have the same sort of desire for X, Y, and Z, security, stability, that sort of thing. And for some reason, why are Americans feeling insecure? Yeah, it's a tough question. It's a tough question, right? Because relatively speaking, you're right. Americans are very well off.
Yeah, it just goes back to my opinion about the severity of the clash between ideologies. It's that kind of thing.
Yes, okay, and if we have communism was a very clear contrast from what the United States wanted. It was a capitalist, relatively free society. So yes, you can make that contrast very clear. So what that did was, in fact, it unified the United States in a lot of ways. It's like, okay, we have a very common enemy here, and so we can rally around that. Yeah. And politicians use that as well to get what they wanted, right? You would never lose a vote by saying you were anti-communist.
So you notice how our topic, our conversation today differs from our last one. So the last one we were focused on the United States solely, right?
Yes.
But this one like the United States didn't appear that much. We're talking about France. We're talking about Germany. Talking about like Eastern Europe, USSR, McCarthy. Not that much about the United States itself. Because there's not that much to talk about it in that period. It's prosperity. What do you expect from that? But here's the thing: why did the Americans succumb to conspiracy theories? It's the question of the era. Why did Americans still feel insecure when they are sitting in the age of prosperity? I believe that is a question we still have to answer even today.
Okay, well, let's take a crack at that then, shall we? Why, prosperity is a relative thing. And so if you ask the average American who has two homes, has a home and two cars and has got a mortgage and has got kids, then you ask him, are you rich? Do you feel secure? And I think a lot of people would say no. And that's the great irony of it all, right? That's because if you told this guy, well, materially, you're better off than 99% of the world's population. Go compare yourself to some guy in Sahara Africa or in the Middle East. That guy does not care about that. He's like, I don't care about those people. I feel insecure, okay? Because, job insecurity, maybe I'm going to get laid off. Taxes are really high. Inflation is high. I don't see a lot of economic opportunities for my children. Education system in the United States has started crumbling. All of these things are in the back of his mind. He doesn't care to compare himself to those people. He's comparing himself to, wealthy Americans.
Yeah, I could say that just because of human greed and nature, that the longing for security and stability will never perish within human minds.
Yes.
However, this trait, this longing for security, does not always bring good to everyone.
Correct.
See, just like the McCarthy era. I think the McCarthy era wants to tell us is that even with abundant living standards, with abundant resources, with very good lifestyle, with everything you can possibly need in that era, at least, conspiracy theories can still exist. Like people can still be scared of things. What LePon said in the crowd still makes sense. In every era, that's the same. Right?
Yes, I would actually 100% agree with that. And so, to overly focus on the material is probably a mistake to understand human beings' behavior and their thought patterns. It's a mistake to look at their education level as well. One of my favorite quotes. I shouldn't say that. Never mind. I had a train of thought, but I probably won't repeat that. Okay. So so maybe people are longing for something else. They're longing for spirituality. They're longing for connections with community. They're looking for love within their family. And what a lot of social sciences have been studying the United States population because of TikTok and not TikTok, but because of social media and what have you, you see they call it an epidemic of loneliness among American men, right? And lonely men are susceptible to conspiracy theories. So this lonely man could have all of the beer he wants to drink and he could have a comfortable home, but he doesn't have a connection to his community. He doesn't have a family. He's susceptible to these things.
Yeah. So many people, so you remember the Rwanda massacre? So many people blame this madness of the crowd to poverty, to the local environment, etc. But I think what McCarthyism gives us, that era is far away now. It's in the past. It's in the trash bin. But what it can give us today is a warning that to warn us that we're never too far away from group madness, from crowd madness that can affect and consume everyone.
100% agree. 100% agree. And so we have to continue to learn. It's a little bit of a shame, but we have to continue to learn the lessons that previous generations had learned. And we don't learn these lessons until we get older in life. Right? You think that history cannot repeat itself, but it always does in some form or another.
Yeah, perhaps what we should do is to make ourselves more rational and make make sure there is not a next McCarthy.
Right, exactly. We would like that to happen, but we would like to think that, oh, we're beyond that. We're far more sophisticated. We would never fall for those types of cheap rhetorical tricks. But we do. But we do.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes some conspiracy theories can be amusing. Lizardman, see, Spider-Man,
Yes.
Tiger-Man.
Yeah.
But I would really hope that this history, as you've said, will not repeat itself, and we will not actually believe in Lizardman. Right.
I agree.
Okay, so people, do not believe in such things, or at least think thrice before you do so, if you do not want to become the next Tyler who beats upon J. Robert Oppenheimer.